Hello, fellow freelancers. Anthem, the much anticipated title from EA and BioWare, is having its VIP demo this weekend, and I hopped in to check it out. And it was beautiful and glorious. But I left with one major question. Why is PC gaming an afterthought? And I don't ask that question coming from a PC Master Race stance, or any sort of air of elitism that is associated with the battle between consoles and PCs. I ask it purely out of objective curiosity. And the first thing that comes to my mind is just money. Do they make that much less money on the PC version that it just doesn't matter if it's good? And you can call me all hail corporate or shill or whatever you want, but that's justifiable to me. If the money's just not there, then I could understand not really doing a release in PC. But I think the reason that they do a release on PC at all is because not only is there a little bit of money to be made there is a lot of money to be made there. So why not go out and try to make happy customers out of your PC player base? To bring you up to speed, the major news out of the Anthem demo is that the UI and controls were done for consoles and never redone for PC players. On PC, it sort of feels like you're playing an emulated version of a console game. And the big question on everyone's mind is, how does that get overlooked? Like, if this was some tiny game, I think people could understand. The small budget associated with that may not allow for a proper release on PC. But Anthem is not that at all. This game is gorgeous. It oozes with the air of huge budget. There is no excuse for not taking the time of doing a proper UI for PC and giving it functional control mechanisms for shooting and flying. And the second thing that comes to mind is maybe the developers are just saying it's just supposed to be about the story. The combat and the controls aren't supposed to matter. Which, okay, let's dive into that. It's a beautiful cinematic world with an interesting story with tons of detail and voice acting. But then you go and you toss in 6 different tiers of difficulty. If you have the foresight to think, oh, we should try to find some replayability in these missions. A lot of our user base will enjoy the combat and want to challenge themselves in that mode. It seems like you've already proven to yourself that you're selling this game to more than just people that are playing on easy mode for the story. And people that want to excel to Grandmaster Tier 3 are going to be the type of people that want the precision and control of a mouse that the acceleration to allow for a joystick just cannot deliver. And then on top of having varying difficulties, they put a lot of time and energy into making the combat style of each javelin very unique. And if you were just there for the story, who cares? Give them one hero, sure, let them level up and pick some abilities so there's the illusion of choice. But in the end, it doesn't really matter for the completion of the story. But that's not the case at all here. The Colossus plays extremely different than the Ranger. And playing the same mission feels very different when you switch which javelin you're using, which is an excellent way to create additional replayability. But again, this is all about the combat, and this piece doesn't really matter for the story. So I want to get into some of the specific gaffes I saw while I was playing, and from there I'm going to lay out why I think it is worth thinking about the PC version just as much as the console versions. So in this mission we had to do a fetch something to activate something quest. And the game is good about throwing handy tooltips at you. That's important so players don't get stuck. But wait, what is that? I didn't know I had that button on my keyboard. So I stopped and I searched. Keyboard, game. Keyboard, game. And for the life of me, I could not find this button on my keyboard. And after hours of research and digging through schematics, I cracked the code, guys. And I'm going to share this one with you so you don't have to go through it as well. It's called a D-pad. I discovered it in my research. It's represented by the A in this diagram. It's this interesting input device that you actually have to let go of your directional control in order to push a button. Terrifying thought, I know. But being serious again, guys, the UI is littered with gamepad-centric advice and gamepad-centric functionality. In the launch menus and the crafting menus, there's a whole bunch of press and hold buttons. Who ever heard of press and hold to do something? You right-click or you click with modifiers and then the action happens or you get options. This whole press and hold to get around the menu feels extremely clunky. And then by default, to go right and left in the menu is Y and U. It's like someone just looked at a keyboard and said, hey, there's all these buttons we're not using. We can just pick some. We can pick any of them. The PC players will be happy because we're using more buttons. They like to use more buttons, right? Having a keyboard isn't about efficient, specific control, is it? Anyways, so the UI needs work. Sure, it's the demo. Maybe they have intentions to make some changes. But right now, it's going to be a big turnoff for the PC players. The next frustrating element was the flying mechanism. To me, that's a big piece of the hype for this game. I had not seen much of the combat before I played. It was just these javelins flying around these epic maps. And that's an important piece of the immersion. The first thing that comes to my mind when I see a high-tech, metal, say iron flying suit is Iron Man. He's fast, he's durable, he's badass. But the one really key thing about the flight suit is he's agile. Obviously, we all have to look past the organ-melting G's that he can pull in that suit. But that's the beauty of any sci-fi universe, you can explain it away. You just want the movement to be comfortable. The flying movement is rough, the swimming movement is awful. Part of the argument here can be chalked up to they're trying to simulate inertia. A big metal mech would be difficult to control. But PC games long ago managed this by making the camera look where you intend to go, and then slowing down the turn rate of the character. That makes your controls feel precise. Here you end up having to look where you don't want to go to get your character to turn, and then try to whip your mouse back right at the end of the turn so they can turn far enough yet go in the direction you want to. This is a movement mechanism intended for joysticks on gamepads. It does not simulate momentum well. It doesn't add to the immersion of being in a javelin. It just feels like, what the F is going on? Why can't I go where I want to go? There is a huge opportunity here with all of these free play landscapes to deliver awesome javelin combination combat and flight scenarios. And it feels like making an epic flight mode was completely abandoned so that it would work easily on gamepads. And you know, that really isn't a good excuse for it. I've played a few different console games where you can shoot in the opposite direction you're running, which is exactly how the flight should be managed. While it's clunkier to do on a gamepad, it's not impossible. This is absolutely a scenario where it should have been created to work well with a mouse and keyboard, and then been re-engineered to work on a gamepad after they made it comfortable there. As it stands, the fast flight mode is good for getting around, but it feels like you're at the mercy of your jetpacks, rather than being the master of your javelin. The hover mode is a nice in-between where you get the effect of hanging out in a giant mech and unloading on enemies below you. But it doesn't feel like agile, skilled combat the javelin should deliver. And the last two things on my mind are the lack of chat and the lack of the score screen at the end of a mission. I think the number one reason to omit chat is basically because it was built around consoles. Chat's just not a feature there. But the other big argument I'd expect to see there is to deal with toxic players. That doesn't entirely follow to me though, because there is still voice chat. Just because someone can't type their toxicity in, they can still speak it. And you could solve toxicity in chat as you do with voice, have a toggle to disable it. Now, I've also heard this argument that companies are avoiding adding chat because a new law requires them to add speech-to-text for blind users. If they're going to force accessibility, that's great, but then they should also force accessibility for deaf users, which would require text chat. I struggle to believe that people are interpreting the law correctly if it's requiring them to support blind users but not deaf users. Perfect example of why chat is so key is jumping into one of the early missions and trying to finish the boss. Because I was in with a bunch of randoms that were just mostly dying, and they couldn't keep the attention of the boss. A chat box would have made all the difference if I could have just said, someone distract them, I'll hit the weak point from behind. Or even vice versa, but when I was the distraction, they seemed to ignore him. Now maybe voice chat will save all this, but a lot of people aren't going to pay attention, or they might be playing with sound off. It's not always a good option. There is no reason this game should go without chat on PC. Okay, so miraculously we finally got it figured out. And it's funny here that it looks like it's changed to nighttime. Honestly, it took long enough that that's probably accurate, but it may just be how the shadows are falling. So we get to the end screen, and there is nothing. I want to know how I did. Was I the idiot that took the most damage? Was I the badass that did the most damage? And a functional end screen is completely omitted. Again, I assume the thought process here is to avoid toxicity. Hey, look at you, man, you only did 1% damage, you got carried. To me, that is a minuscule percentage of the people that want end screens. Most people want to know how the mission went so they can keep track of their own personal improvement. You know, something that's going to come up here is all the similarities to Warframe. And when you first start out in that game and you get to the end screen, there's a lot of 1% damage done. Higher level players end up running with you, so you get carried. It's actually a big help, but at the end screen you look pretty disappointing. But as you get better and better and acquire more gear and upgrade your weapons, all of a sudden your numbers start going up. Oh, I did 7% of the damage that time. Oh, I did 13% of the damage that time. And as you become a more veteran player, then you get to be the person that carries, and you end up doing 90% of the damage for that mission. It helps you see that all this work you're doing, all the grinding you're doing, is paying off. That cool weapon that's a big upgrade for you that you just got actually means something. It's tough to see those effects from a few damage floaties that show a little additional damage. Showing your stats from a mission is going to go a long way in terms of keeping players involved with improving and upgrading their javelins. At any rate, there's a lot of decisions here that are very console-based, which are going to be detrimental to the PC experience. So I want to spend a moment here just trying to figure out why that is. Why it's okay to disappoint the PC player base. Because at first glance, it seems like PC players dominate the space around Anthem. Just on the Discord, the ratio of PC players to console players is almost 3-to-1. And social media engagement tends to be higher from PC players as well. I think a lot of PC players use these types of stats to justify and say, hey, EA, look at these numbers, you should give us more attention. The reality is I think PC players are just more engaged. The actual sales numbers are not skewed in that almost 3-to-1 ratio. So for me, what I'm looking at is revenues for each segment. Now there's a little bit of guesswork in any of these numbers, but these are the best publicly available numbers I could find. In 2017, PC games did about $29.4 billion in revenue, and consoles did $33.5 billion in revenue. In 2018, PC gaming did almost $33 billion in revenue, and console gaming did $34.6 billion. Console gaming winning the growth game between those two, and mobile gaming coming out far in the lead in terms of year-over-year growth. So sure, the overall revenue pie slices for PC gaming and console gaming are pretty similar, but the big thing PC gamers have to think about is there is drastically more competition in the space. Anthem on console will directly compete with things like Warframe or Destiny, but it also has to compete with every other console title out there to some extent. And there's just not a lot of them. Compared to PC, where Anthem has to compete with every other game on Steam, over 7,000 of them. So my expectation is it basically comes down to this. EA looks at it and says, hey, we think we can grab 2% of the console market with this title. Look at the PC version with all the competition there and say, hey, we think we can grab 0.5% of this market. Even though that's still a really nice take, it doesn't compare to what they can earn from consoles. And so they focus their efforts on making the experience great for consoles, and PC is an afterthought. Now, obviously, my numbers are meaningless. I have no idea what Anthem will generate. Maybe we'll get some news and quarterly reporting from EA. Let's say by dumb luck my numbers are right. They're still dragging down $150 million in revenue from PC players. There is more than enough there to make sure the experience is good for them. Eking out another 0.5% in margins on the title is not worth a disappointing experience to all of those PC players. Now the good thing is, as the community is bringing up a lot of these complaints, one of the lead devs for the project has responded. And his answer was a combination of, okay, good feedback, we'll look into it, and also that this was a demo build which would have been finalized a few months back, and improvements continued to go into what would be the live version released on the 22nd. So hopefully that's correct. It's great that they're just stepping up and communicating. After he said that, players from Alpha immediately chimed in and said, hey, we mentioned all these things back in the Alpha phase, and you guys said they'd be addressed, and here we are right next to launch, and nothing's changed. So if it's just lip service to manage any fallout from the demo, there's no way for us to know until launch day. So guys, those are the big things that jumped out at me. And if I get any more news on them addressing some of these issues, I will pass it along. Now, there were a couple other hiccups in the demo that I would not worry about. The login issues. A lot of you probably face this if you were trying to play the demo. The reality is I don't know any successful game that launched without some form of login issues on the first day. When the news is good, that people are interested and excited about something, they overwhelm the servers, and the company's got to scramble to keep up. And they did that pretty well. The servers were up and relatively stable about 6 hours into the demo. The only time I really ran into any latency issues when I was in the game was once I entered the free play mode. I was having to fight through some rubber banding that seemed to get worse the longer I was in free play mode. Again, I am just chalking this up to being a VIP demo sort of thing, working out the kinks of the initial server load. I expect all that stuff to be cleaned up by the time of launch. So folks, I wanted to make sure I brought up the things that are concerning me. What I don't want it to take away from is how beautiful the game is. While I didn't spend a lot of time exploring the limited release of the main town, I can tell there are so many threads to pull at, so much to explore there. The VIP demo's going on right now, and then there's an open demo going from the 1st to the 3rd of February. I'm going to wait to dive into anything else that includes some of the story type of details until those are completed, for fear of spoiling it for someone. Okay, fellow freelancers, that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you outside the fort.